find a way to get yourself to 0.1 of a Bitcoin. Maybe you want to retire early. Maybe you don't want to wait till you're 60 or 65. And if you can get to that 0.1 as quickly as possible before that, it's going to 100x in the next 10 years and it's going to 1,000x in the next. People like Michael Saylor, who publicly said that take us to a $13 million Bitcoin in years. But I think the whole thing that can accelerate this is if you buy 0.1 today, 10,000 US dollars, in 15 years, that's...
Mr. Zane Truscott, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate your invitation, Brandon. A pleasure to be here.
You are one of my favorite voices over the last handful of months in the Bitcoin space. And I think I speak for a lot of people because you have a growing channel. And I think people are going to see much more of your face here in the future, whether it's just on YouTube or social media, but also whether it's conferences or speaking conferences, emceeing events. I think that's definitely something that's going to be in your future. One of the things I want to start with, though, inflation. I know you're a great student of Jeff Booth's, and he talks about this all the time and how you can't fix the system from the current system. You're right. Like we have to shift change to something else. We've talked about inflation and incentive structures and what inflation does to society and to people, keeping them on this rat wheel so they don't have time to do other things, quite simply. I mean, it's really as simple as that. The money supply expanding, that's something I was seeing recently, 8% being this big number. I've been seeing float out. Larry Lepard wrote about it in his book, The Big Print. It's been making the rounds again here where like the money supply, everything's just expanding for decades by about 8%. And then, you know, the debt is going up by 8%. The markets are all going up by 8%. And finally, we were seeing it more now of it's all one trade, right? It's all one trade. And everyone realizes like, oh, I'm rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. And I feel like society's starting to understand that a little bit. And that's where Bitcoin is the thing. Like you said, I would love for you to get into some of the incentives of this world we're in, but more or less, I would love for you to get into the Kager and is the reverse Kager calculator you talk about, because this is where we're going, where Bitcoin being the thing that's beating everything else constantly, and everything else is just keeping up with the currency printing, and that's it. So I would love for you to kind of unpack this a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, another great Australian guy, Peter Dunworth, who I know you've had on your show, Brandon, you know, he's just a brilliant macro guy, has a deep understanding of Bitcoin and history and where all of this is going. And, you know, he often talks about, particularly in Australia, how, you know, since 1971, you know, this 100x that we've had in real estate, that is an opportunity that is not going to be there for the next generation, you know, and it's kind of an opportunity that was there post, you know, severance of the gold standard. We saw a rotation of financialization into real estate and banking deregulation and all of these things. But all we've really created is housing has become a casino, you know, so it's no longer utility value. It's no longer what housing is meant to be. You know, it's meant to be a place where you lay down your roots and you have a family and, you know, you build for the future, the great Australian dream, the great American dream. Mm-hmm. We've got the same dreams, you know, Australians and Americans. We have the same dreams. Canadians are the same. But the reality is that dream no longer exists. Okay. And I know that for an absolute fact because, you know, I mingle with kids in their 20s because I've got 3 daughters in their 20s. And when we have gatherings and, you know, get-togethers and barbecues and parties and events and things like that, you know, I get to talk to these kids and, you know, they've already sold out the future for the present because they know that there's no hope. They can no longer save their way to prosperity anymore. And that's a really sad thing, you know. They're living for today because they know there's no point in them sacrificing their lifestyle now in their 20s to try and save 10, 15, 20 years for a down payment on a house because that day is never going to come, you know. So it's a really sad situation. But a lot of people don't realize that when they look at the value of real estate as an example, it's only really tracked with the expansion of the money supply over the last 50 years. And so even though people are under the illusion that they've generated significant wealth through this, 80 to 100x, whatever the averages are, somewhere in that ballpark, when you really consider lifestyle, they've only really transferred from then to now in terms of transferring that wealth into lifestyle. And so, I think that the more people begin to realize that when it comes to assets and it comes to inflation, we have to be stored in monetary instruments that can't be corrupted. And this is what Bitcoin is. And this is why when we really consider true inflation, which is not just what they tell us, they tell us about the price of bread and milk and eggs going up by, 5% in a year, known as CPI, Consumer Price Index inflation. And so everybody listens to the news and the economists and the treasurer and the politicians. They're all talking about CPI, Consumer Price Inflation. And they kind of just take that for what it is. But what they don't realize is that there's a more sinister form of inflation known as monetary expansion that is stealing from their purchasing power at an even more significant rate. And this is why we have what's known as a hurdle rate. And the hurdle rate is more like 13 to 15%, which basically means in order to keep up with true inflation, which is the rate of monetary expansion, you need to be saving your time and energy in abstract form in an asset that is going to beat that. And we know that real estate over the past 100 years in this country, and I'm sure it's probably similar in the US, it's hovered around that 8 to 10% per annum. And, in today's world, it's not enough to keep up with true inflation. Bitcoin, when we look at the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin, if you just take the last 10 years, it's hovered around that 55 to 60% compound annual growth rate. And I know a lot of people immediately challenge this and they say, oh yeah, but that's not going to continue. Oh yeah, but this is going to level out. Oh yeah, it's going to, go to 15 and 10% and it's going to, fall to the same rate of growth that most other assets. But the reason that's not going to happen is because Bitcoin is absolute scarcity. And this is the reason why Bitcoin is demonetizing gold. It's demonetizing real estate. It's demonetizing the S&P because it's a scarcer asset than all of those. And, there's a great graph actually that Kathy Wood and ARK Invest put out that I often share with people, and it shows over the last decade the average compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin versus every other asset on average. And when we talk about every other asset, we're talking stocks, bonds, real estate, currencies, collectibles, fine art. I mean, you name it, right? Mm-hmm. 7.5 to 8%, whereas Bitcoin's done 59, I believe is the exact figure. And so it's outperformed everything to the tune of 7, 8, 9 times. And yet people are still ignoring it. And so this is the reality that people have to wake up to. The reason why Bitcoin is repricing everything, the reason why the price of everything else is falling in Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is the most scarce asset that we have. There is only 21 million Bitcoin. There is only 100 million Satoshis, fractions of a Bitcoin, per Bitcoin. And if people could just understand that, I think it'll help them to understand that when you have a finite monetary instrument sitting over here that cannot be changed, doesn't matter how much the US government buys of it, it still can't be changed. And then you have the infinite currency, which we know is infinite. It's always going to be inflated forever. And then we have these less scarce assets from, stocks and shares to real estate. This is the reason why Bitcoin is repricing everything else, because it's the most scarce, whereas everything else is not absolutely scarce. So it's just a realization, I think, Brandon, that people are going to come to in their own time. But this is part of the great transition that we're in. The shift in people's understanding of moving from this debt-based fiat system to this decentralized, absolutely scarce, finite asset.
So I have multiple things I want to unpack here. This is fascinating. I think this is really the crux of some of the stuff we've already talked about, and like the head games I think the average person plays in their head. And let's be honest, even Bitcoiners. I mean, I know the reason I think many of us are here is because we still question to this day. We still go through the game in our own head. You go through the gauntlet of, am I right? Are we going the right direction? Which I think is incredibly important. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Thomas Jefferson, of question everything with boldness, even the existence of God himself. Or if there is a God, surely he'd appreciate that over blindfolded fear. And it's just this constant learning, this growth, going back to the personal development, your whole life being centered around this. Much of my life was centered around this. And so I think that is why we're here. So we're constantly asking that. And I think that's really what we're trying to get across to in a large extent. You have a pretty amazing background, and you have helped tons of people. You've coached tons of people on money, personal development, bettering yourself, holistic approaches to life, your health. I would love for you to talk about how many hours you've spent helping people, and also why people still are missing Bitcoin. Why are we only at 100,000 US dollars or 110,000? Why are we only there and we're not at 10 million, 20 million when all the information is there for us? I'd love for you to dive into your experience here, but also why is it taking seemingly so long with all the information available for us to get to a point where we all know this is headed?
Yeah, I mean, great question up front. I guess a lot to unpack there. Probably a good place to start, Brandon, is just a real brief synopsis of my background and how I got here to be in Bitcoin, and now to be, I guess, teaching and coaching people in this space. I kind of grew up in the personal development industry. My mom and her partner, they used to bring speakers out, particularly from America in the mid to late 80s and 90s. And so I spent a lot of time in that space. And I guess from that, I really got to understand, the power of positive change and crafting your life and shaping your destiny and thinking outside the box and entrepreneurship and personal growth and living life at a higher level, and so, for me, it's been a natural progression to Bitcoin because I see Bitcoin as positive change. I see it as a way for people to escape the matrix, escape the 9 to 5, the rat race, all of the things that people seem to be stuck in these days that aren't necessarily their fault. It's more a function of the system. And the reality is, unless you have a desire and a willingness and the proactivity to think outside the box and to go on a hunt for positive information, be it Bitcoin and anything else, most people are going to stay stuck. And so for me to be, sharing Bitcoin, I mean, for 15 years, I had a seminar company of my own. My wife and I, we used to travel all across Australia. For 15 years. We'd do about 30 events a year, preview events where we'd have hundreds of people in a seminar room in all the major cities of Australia. And then we'd dovetail into a 3-day workshop, which was really transformational for people. We worked very closely with a gentleman by the name of Don Tolman, who's a US educator. And it was all about holistic health, stepping outside of the healthcare matrix and being responsible for your own health and well-being. And so we used to promote this message called self-care and self-education. Self-care and self-education. And so For me now, to be able to, utilize the knowledge I've gained since 2018 when I first really dove into Bitcoin, and then probably at an accelerated rate during COVID, because I think COVID for most people was a massive wake up call. And that's when I really started to double down on my learning, and now earlier this year I made the choice to start sharing what I know about Bitcoin, and what's happening now is I'm getting a lot of people in their middle stages of life, who are probably looking to plan for retirement, who understand the system is broken, and they're coming to me, and I'm having one-on-one sessions, consultations, coaching calls with them. And it's all about just helping people, firstly, to really level up whatever their setup is right now in terms of self-custody, in terms of stacking, in terms of, getting themselves self-sovereign. A lot of people are looking to take their retirement account, which we know retirement accounts right now are essentially under attack. There's a lot of laws coming into Australia pending that are attacking our 401k system, which of course is known as superannuation. And so with all of that, it's kind of the long-winded, I guess, answer to your question, but I wanted to give the viewers just a bit of a background as to why I'm here, how I got here. But for me, Bitcoin is the number one thing that anybody should be learning about right now, because it's not just about money. It's about personal transformation. It's about personal growth. It's about looking forward to the world we want to see. There's a saying in Bitcoin, as you well know, Brandon, fix the money, fix the world. So when we can return to sound money, which is what Bitcoin truly is, we can start to really reshape the world and create a brighter future, not just for ourselves, but for our kids and our families as well.
I love that you touch on personal development, and Bob Proctor's. I had the honor of meeting him 15 years ago, I guess, probably now at this point, almost 15 years ago, and was one of my big mentors as well. And I know we talked about that offline. And I can't help but think, I always think about politicians too, but just the Bitcoiner world tends to be very personal development centric. And I always thought politicians, man, they could use personal development, personal growth, and why aren't people doing more of this? So I love that that's your background. You touch on that. How many hours do you think you put into studying money, studying personal development, helping people with all these things, really leading into what you're doing now, and just your study of Bitcoin itself? What does that look like, that journey for you?
I guess I'd need to get my calculator out here, man, but to work it out. But look, it's been decades. I'm 52. I've been on a hunt for learning since I was probably 13. Like I said, I grew up in this personal development kind of arena. So 3-4 decades of learning constantly. I've done all the Tony Robbins seminars, and so for me, it's just an ongoing quest for personal growth and learning and expanding my knowledge. And I think as human beings, the minute we stop growing or start aspiring to a better future or making progress, I think a part of us kind of starts to die a little inside. And so even at my age, having raised 3 kids and been married for 25 years, and all the ups and downs and challenges and trials and tribulations that come with all of that stuff, and having a business and then having your business essentially shut down in 2020, we had to really consider what we were going to do and the future, and pivot and all of these things. But in terms of Bitcoin, I haven't worked out how many hours I've spent, but what I do know is that these days I spend at least 2 hours a day tuned into people like yourself. I mean, you interview some phenomenal guests who I have a lot of respect for in this space. And, obviously I've got my favorites. I mean, there's so many people now in the Bitcoin community and running podcasts and doing interviews. And we tend to kind of, after a while, we find our voices that we like to tune into. and so look, I'm probably, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 5 to 10,000 hours of Bitcoin learning when I consider the books and the podcasts. And and I also consider, Brandon, when I'm sharing, sitting in the front seat of my truck, doing these videos I've been doing for the last few months now, that's a learning journey for me as well. I don't profess to know everything there is to know about Bitcoin. I mean, there are guys that are so much more advanced and versed in this space than I am. But, I feel like my message just resonates with people, because it's simple, it's clear. I try to get people to understand that this is not an asset to be afraid of. It's an asset that you need to lean into. And then when I get to meet people on a deeper level and find out, where they're at and their challenges, and most of it's mental, most of it's just a self-imposed restriction on their willingness to kind of lean in to what Bitcoin is. And you and I both know that the more you lean into Bitcoin and do the learning, do the study, do the proof of work, the more your conviction grows. And the more your conviction grows, the more you want to do, and be it the amount that you're stacking, be it, your approach to security and sovereignty, because, Bitcoin's not something that you kind of just buy a bit of Bitcoin on an exchange and then shut up shop and that's it. It's an ongoing journey. So, yeah, I wish I could give you the exact number of hours, brother, but it would be a rough estimate.
It's amazing. And I think it's important for people to understand, because it always seems to come up in the sense of people just think that Bitcoiners, like, oh, you're lucky, oh, it just, what, I just rolled out of bed one day type of thing. And it's like all of a sudden this epiphany came on you. It's like, hey, Bitcoin's the answer. And I always tell people, Bitcoin's a gauntlet, but Bitcoin is that's why I love that, you're talking about all this, because it is a journey. It's this self-actualization, Maslow's top, the hierarchy of needs. And you go through this gauntlet, we all go through it. And you don't just wake up one day and just have this answer. It's this journey that you are on. It doesn't mean you're necessarily spending 10,000 hours just studying the Bitcoin white paper, but it's everything. It's 10,000 hours of self-actualization, personal development, growth. I'm trying to get better every single day. And that's what leads you to Bitcoin. And then you do a lot of study in Bitcoin. So I love that you say that, because it's so important for people to understand these distinctions, and also the experience and why someone should be listened to. So I think it's very, very important. I kind of touched on the fair distribution of Bitcoin, which I want to touch on a little bit. But right now, you just mentioned something about Australia, what happened in 2020. It just makes me think of the EU bailing out its citizens, or bailing in its citizens, possibly here in a few months. California, there was just something, which I don't know exactly what's going on there, but they're trying to pass something about they can't have Bitcoin more than 3 years on exchanges, or they're going to take it from you. The superannuation being under attack, like you said, in Australia, the 401k here, it's very, very underfunded. The retirement here in America, and not to mention Medicare and Social Security here in America, is, by government's own admission, is bankrupt and won't exist in 10 years. So I would love for you to just unpack how you see this being, Bitcoin being a part of this journey. We're seeing bit bonds, being talked about now, and all these things starting to come about, because there's clearly cracks all over the system. And there's a lot of people just kind of drowning, and they don't know what's going on. Most people have their heads in the sand, which rightfully so, because they know inherently inside what's happening, but they don't want to look at the actual problem. How do you see Bitcoin becoming part of this solution going forward, that's going to start reversing the tide of all these cracks in the system that we're seeing everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, man, because I think, and I talk about this a lot, I say that Bitcoin is a life raft escape from the control system, and people don't really understand necessarily what that means in the first instance. But, the more you hear about, this talk of CBDCs and the $10 trillion, strategic reallocation or whatever, they always come up with these, branded words kind of things to justify what they're trying to do. But when you start scratching the surface and you realize that it's just a segue into surveillance money, greater control over people's lives, and if people could only just understand what that actually means. And, if you start placing restrictions on people's ability to go about their life from a personal finance point of view, and you start really centralizing that to a different level. I mean, we still have access to cash, which, is a bearer instrument. You and I can trade, $10 or $100 bills, and no one needs to know about it. And that's a right that right now we still have. But, if you kind of start to crystal ball all of this and you look at the red flags and what's going on, you can't help but think that we're heading down a road which is, it's going to put a lot of people in a position where, because they didn't see the signs and make adjustments and start, looking for a path that was decentralized instead of centralized, which is what Bitcoin is. That's the reality of where we're headed. And I don't pay attention every day to the mainstream news. I spend very little time on it. And so for me, it's very difficult to sort of comment on a lot of these things that are going on. I do have an ear to the ground, and I am kind of broadly familiar with things that are going on. But for me, it's just reinforcement as to why people really need to be doing their homework on Bitcoin sooner rather than later, and not putting it on the back burner, because a lot of people forget, that Bitcoin was a gift to the world at a very specific time, right? Bitcoin came out in October 2008. And what happened in September 2008? We saw the fall of Lehman Brothers, and it was the cascading effect, the global financial crisis. And people have very, very short memories. We think of the COVID era, the global financial crisis, the ripple effect, all of the bailouts that the big end of town was able to tap into to save their asses. And yet, who got left holding the bag? And so people will, I think, tolerate disruption to their life, inflation, a cost of living crisis, a growing wealth gap, not being able to buy a home, all of these things people will tolerate to a certain level. But I'm not quite sure what the breaking point's going to be. Maybe it's going to be they go to the bank one day and the ATM doesn't work, or you try to call the bank because the ATM doesn't work and nobody picks up the phone. And we know these things have happened. I mean, I know you had Tony Yazbek on your show very recently. I mean, to me, Tony is one of the best guys in Bitcoin to listen to, because he's not there to just teach people about the number go up side of it. More importantly, he's there to teach people about the freedom and the sovereignty side of it. And unfortunately, what I find in the Bitcoin space, there's not enough time spent on that side of it. And so I spend a lot of time on that side of it. I don't really pay attention to the day-to-day price movements of Bitcoin, because for me, I think we're going to head into a parallel economy situation anyway. It's just going to happen. And I know in the US, we're already seeing fast food chains like Steak and Shake and that are now all of a sudden accepting Bitcoin as a payment option. And I think we're going to see all of that happen at an accelerated rate over the next couple of years. And so, look, it's really it's difficult to know what the pivotal point's going to be where people start to really wake up and go, okay, we understand now. All you crazy Bitcoiners, you've been pounding the table for the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and we haven't been paying attention. But shit, we've got to pay attention now, But the unfortunate thing about that is that, and I'm not a big fan of this saying, but there is a reality that people get Bitcoin at the price they deserve because, they put it on the back burner for a long, long time. I heard about Bitcoin in 2013. I didn't think I needed it. My business was going great. Things were going great. It didn't make any sense to me. And my ego stopped me from learning about it, So, man, I hope that kind of goes some way to answering your question, but there's so much to unpack there.
Yeah, that's such a phenomenal point, Zane. I mean, there's so many things we could unpack there that it makes me think of how do you teach? Because I think about this all the time. How do you teach people? Because I know my life, I'm 38 years old, and I know where I am now is where I've been called to be for my entire life. And now Bitcoin didn't exist for all that time, but everything I was doing was leading up to this time. And I always had this call and this pull to educate people really about truth. I don't know how else to say it other than that. And that's a call I can feel from you. I was just in Vegas, and we just had the big conference there, the big Bitcoin magazine conference. And a lot of people there, they have that same call and that same feeling, but how do you get people how do you teach them and educate them to see what we're seeing, or to start understanding that, or be active in it and take a liking to it, or whatever it might be? Because like you said, people get it at the price they deserve, because a lot of people just don't care, especially in the Western world, where all of a sudden, I mean, it's almost hard to even say that though, because like you said, I mean, there's Tony Yazbek, what happened in Lebanon there. There's, CBDC talk all around the world, just this digital panopticon. There's lockdowns all over the world, Australia, the UK, the US. You've got, bank accounts being frozen, the Dutch farmers, the Canadian truckers. It goes on and on. These are not emerging markets by any means. I mean, these are G7, G20 countries. How, in all your years of learning and understanding, how do you strike that balance? Because I think that's what we're all wondering, whether we're people on podcasts or people conducting podcasts or Bitcoin education. How do we help people see that light and that truth, but not have to touch a stove, not have to have all those bad things happening that we've kind of been, thrown out there the last 20 minutes?
Yeah. I think the first reality is that with Bitcoin, you've got to take the red pill before you take the orange pill. Which means you have to be willing to learn about money. And I think until you learn about money and what money really is, it's not this thing that we're going to work for every day, the Australian dollar, the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, whatever it might be. Yes, we've been raised to believe that that's money. And the past 50 years, it's all we've known, since 1971, when we came off the gold standard. But people don't even know that simple reality, Brandon, that in 1971, there was a crisis moment. And, President Nixon made an announcement that we were going to temporarily suspend the convertibility into gold. Suspend the convertibility of gold into dollars because of the speculators. And of course, we know whenever a politician says that something's temporary, it basically means that it's permanent. So,
I was thinking of that quote just now. Yeah.
So that reality in itself, I think if people would just understand that, and the reason why this is important is because everybody's life, if they really think about it for just 1 minute, it's centered around the almighty dollar. People are working harder than they ever have for less, because their purchasing power is being decimated. And they don't realize that. They know that, shit's going down because they go to the grocery store and they can see that they can buy half the stuff they could buy 5 years ago for the same amount of money. And they can see that a house, that was, I don't know, $400,000 5 years ago is now, 800 to $1 million. But their income hasn't doubled, and so people know inherently, intuitively, that there's a problem, but because they haven't been sort of walked through what the problem is, they're just sort of on a path to destruction. I mean, I love the quote from Michael Saylor. People are working exponentially harder for a currency that is growing exponentially weaker, and that is the road to serfdom. And serfdom is essentially slavery. It's peasantry. Right? And this is how you create a Hunger Games society where all of the wealth goes to the top 5%, the middle class fall to the bottom, and you've got a two-tiered society where, all of those people who are fortunate enough before all of this inflation went to a hyperinflationary accelerated level like it has in the last, 5 years since COVID, they're getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And everybody else who's just working for an honest living, trying to raise their kids, trying to put food on the table, trying to pay their rent, trying to pay their mortgage. These poor people, they're just getting smashed and they're falling to the bottom. So they know it's happening inherently, like within them, but they just don't know what the cause is. And I think if people could understand what the cause is, it's not something that you've done. It's something that's outside of your control, but you have the power to take back control by learning about Bitcoin. And so we can, and I know we're going to head down this path, we're going to talk about why Bitcoin's the solution, but the reality is until people take that red pill, there's no way they're going to walk down the path of Bitcoin, because I say to people all the time, and I've met people, very successful people who high net worth, assets, real estate rich, and all of these things, and they bought Bitcoin. The number go up and maybe they doubled, tripled their money.
Hold on 1 second. If you are holding your Bitcoin on an exchange still or sharing your keys and your KYC information with a third party, everything you're learning about right now is completely moot. This is your wake-up call. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. Bitcoin's the first and only asset in human history where humans can actually custody entirely their asset. Custody sounds daunting at first, and believe me, it was for me 10 years ago, and I missed a year or two of massive gains, and I don't want that to be you. It's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Asback and the Bitcoin Way. His team will train you to do it right the first time. We just interviewed Tony the other day, has 50,000 views, an unbelievable response. People love him and his story and what he has to share and his mission. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. So quit sitting on your hands like I did a decade ago and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/Brandon. Now back to the show.
And they sold it, and these are smart people, right? They just had no idea about the asset that they hold because they just haven't done the work on Bitcoin, and they'll probably never get it back, and that's the greatest shame, that even smart people haven't done the work on Bitcoin yet, because, people are living their lives, they're running their businesses, they're doing what's always worked for them. Some people are really successful in that, and so they don't have that need to know. Again, another Saylor quote. Bitcoin is a need to know basis, and that's why a lot of people who are highly successful don't embrace Bitcoin, because they don't have a need to know. They're successful in the fiat system. But the people I feel for most are those who are in the middle, whose lives and their financial futures are being taken away from them without them even realizing it. And they don't yet realize that Bitcoin is a solution. But I do believe that in time, they will. And I'm not sure what that moment's going to be, but we're all doing our best to try and educate the world, aren't we? So, it's. I think there's a reality to life too. That if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? It's true for so many things, and I think it's true for Bitcoin as well. It's not an easy path to walk down, to do the work, to study, to develop your conviction, to take that first step to actually buy a bag of sats, or some Bitcoin, and then the next step, which is to actually take it into self-custody. And it just takes that all takes learning and a willingness to go down this path. And I'm on a mission just to help people simplify it, not be daunted by it, realize that you don't have to own one whole Bitcoin. This whole thing is fractionalized. You can get exposure to this asset. You don't have to give away the farm, but just take some form of action, and just one step at a time, just further your knowledge, further your conviction, because this is the future.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that a little bit, obviously, as well. Just, obviously the big thing is people understanding that like you said, it's fractionalized. One Bitcoin may be unobtainable for most people even to this day, but it's fractionalized, and that's the beauty of it, and dollar cost averaging. So we can talk about that in a little bit. but just on a little bit more of this theme of kind of just personal development. And I think it's the marriage of personal development and personal growth and Bitcoin has just always been very striking to me. And you don't hear it talked about a lot actually in Bitcoin, which is kind of weird to me. Like people talk about getting better and cast iron versus, stainless steel. And they talk about, grass-fed beef and citadels and all these amazing things. But personal development itself is not talked about a ton, which is a little interesting to me. But do you think that Bitcoin, again, like you said, Bitcoin fixes this, or the quote of you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you? Do you think that it really does? Because trying to put a bow on this whole section that we're talking about of do you think that Bitcoin really will incentivize different changes inside of human beings? And even 100 years from now, when there's another fourth turning, will people revert back to their old ways because they didn't go through the pain maybe that we went through, or certain pains that we've kind of been living through? Or is that strong enough where the money that is there and is ubiquitous at that point, is it really changing society that much where people understand, yes, or at least most people are changed by the Bitcoin and they're not messing with that anymore, and we've moved on to bigger and better things, type 1 sentient society or whatever it is? What are your thoughts, and is it really changing, or is it really going to change people? Or are we going to be right back here 100 years from now?
I think it all comes down to incentive structure, Brandon. Like I just think that I've got my life savings in Bitcoin, and that wasn't an easy decision to make, but it's only happened because I understand what it is. And I've never sold any Bitcoin, because, I could have gone on a holiday, bought a new car, a new house, there's a whole bunch of things I could have done. But for me, I understand what this asset is. I understand it's multi-generational wealth. I've got a generation coming behind me. I'm going to be a grandfather this December, and
oh, congrats.
So for me, I'm like, I feel like I'm the custodian or the guy that's really paving the way for my descendants to understand what this really represents. And so, yes, I do think it's going to change the way we view the world and the way we function. And if you're in Bitcoin now and you see people who are moving fully to a Bitcoin standard now, I mean, that's a difficult thing to do right now for many different reasons for many people. But it is happening, and there are people running businesses that are Bitcoin only. And if you want to exchange value with them, you have to do it in Satoshis, So these kind of things are happening. And the reason why they don't want to accept fiat currency is because to them, fiat currency is worthless, and they'd much prefer to be exchanging their services and their value for a currency that is real, that is truth, that is integrity, that is finite. They're exchanging their value out into the world, and in return for that, they want a currency that they can trust. And right now, we don't have that. Right now, everyone around us is working for a currency that cannot be trusted. And so I just think as we head down this path more and more, and Bitcoin continues to I guess reprice every other asset and reprice every good, every service. It starts to reprice the world, which you and I both know it's already happening, but it's just that most people aren't aware of it. They're not pricing things in Bitcoin; they're pricing things in the dollar or the euro or whatever. But I think that's going to change, and I even think that really high net worth individuals, I think they're going to be the next ones who are going to dive into Bitcoin, because they're going to realize that when they start pricing their real estate, their developments, their stock portfolios, their superannuation, retirement accounts, all of these things, they start pricing them in Bitcoin, and they actually see what's truly happening, that the value of them is going down, not just slowly. This is at a rapid rate. And I want to share an example for you today of a property that my wife and I purchased about 3 years ago, and how, in Bitcoin, that thing, it's going south, So it's, look, I like to think that Bitcoin is more than just a store of value. I'm a big proponent of Bitcoin transitioning into being a ubiquitous part of society. It becomes a medium of exchange and a unit of account for that matter. But I think a lot of people right now are still very much stuck on Bitcoin being an absolute store of value, never sell it. Yes, you've got to be really careful about what you exchange it for. But I am a big believer in the likes of Tony and Jeff Booth and these people who really advocate for Bitcoin being used as a value exchange and the way that they say, it really needs to become that for it to succeed over the long term. So, it's I think it just comes down to incentive structure, and the more that people realize that there's a way that they can exchange their value, even if not for Satoshis, even if not for Bitcoin in the interim, they can exchange their value for the currency of the now, which, is their fiat currency, depending on when they live. But in terms of storing that economic energy, storing that value, right now, I think the name of the game is to store as much of that economic output, that value exchange in Bitcoin as you can. And this is why we often refer to Bitcoin as a savings technology. So it's incentive structures, man.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Where do you think we are? I know, like Dr. Jeff Ross always talks about, and many too, but I know a number of years ago he was one of the first I would see bringing it up, but just being in the 4 phases of money, the collectible phase, store of value, then medium exchange, and then unit of count. So you're just kind of touching on that. But do you feel like we are close to that? I mean, it feels like we're really in that store of value phase, but do you think we're close to that medium of exchange world, maybe this epoch, or is it maybe next epoch where people start really it becoming ubiquitous, where people are using it? Is it capital gains thing, bills that need to be passed where it's removing the capital gains taxes in a lot of these countries? Is that what's holding us back? Where do you see us on that spectrum right now?
Well, I think it's happening. I think right before our very eyes, we're seeing this gradually and then suddenly thing start to unfold. I mean, you've got one of the biggest fast food chains in America. I'm not sure exactly where they sit, but they're now accepting Bitcoin. You can pay via Lightning, to get your burger and fries. I mean, that is the sort of thing that other businesses start to notice that, hey, there's a portion of our revenue that we can actually store in this pristine asset, and so the more people wake up to that, the quicker it's going to happen. I think overnight. I think it's just going to. We're in a phase now, I believe, where we're transitioning from everybody seeing Bitcoin primarily as a store of value to what Bitcoin was really meant to be, as outlined in the white paper, Satoshi's white paper. It was peer-to-peer transfer, and I think we're going to head into that phase reasonably quickly. And you've only got to look at technologies over the last 20 years that we kind of didn't pay attention to for a while, and then all of a sudden, overnight. I mean, look at Uber, for example. I remember being in LA in I think 2012, and my brother was standing on the side of a street. I was saying, geez, I've got to get a bloody cab somewhere. My brother said, man, you got to do this Uber thing. I said, Uber? What do you mean? He said, no, it's a new thing. You just download the app and someone will come and pick you up. And I said, well, who's going to pick me up? Oh, no, this someone, their own car. They've got their own car and they're going to take you to where you need to go. And I said, but I'm not going to get in someone else's car in a city I don't know. And, so you think about that stuff and how kind of foreign these things are in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they just become a reality of society. I mean, I can't remember the last time I got a taxi now. I mean, I just use Uber wherever I go. And I was just in Bali, Indonesia just last week. And whilst they don't have Uber, they got a very similar app called Gojek, and it was just a breeze to use that and get around like that. So, I just think that that's where we are now, man. I think we're whether it takes 2 years, 5 years, I really think we're heading into that path now where more and more businesses are going to start accepting Bitcoin as a payment option. I think, was it Square that just announced last week?
Yeah.
They're bringing it into their payment solution. This sort of stuff, it's going to become more and more prominent, and so as people start to see that, they're going to go. It's going to push them more into Bitcoin in terms of their learning journey, and then they're going to utilize it, and then I think we'll be sitting here in a few years' time saying it's pretty normal for businesses to accept Bitcoin. So and if the more that this push happens with these potential central bank digital currencies, and the more that people get squeezed by their banks and realize that Bitcoin is decentralized sovereign money that is peer-to-peer, that can't be stopped. I mean, I think there's going to be a flood of people moving over to Bitcoin, but it's these things are gradually, then suddenly. That's what I believe.
Yeah, there's definite S-curve adoptions with new products or technologies, that's for sure. And speaking of new products, new technologies, what are your thoughts on some of the, speaking of announcements, the different lending platforms that are coming out, and different lending providers, new capital coming into the market, obviously, and it seems like we're just at the beginning of this phase. But what's your take on the lending side of things? And either is it going to reduce sell pressure, possibly because people lending? Is it going to speed things up? I mean, where do you see this kind of playing out as we move forward here?
Yeah, I mean, I pay quite a bit of attention to, CJ. I listen to a lot of his stuff. CJ Konstantinos. He's the head of a company called the People's Reserve, and I'm keeping a close eye on what what he's sharing out there in the Bitcoin community about Bitcoin-backed mortgages and that kind of thing. And I find it really fascinating. And I think that when you have pristine collateral, which is what Bitcoin is, I think that I guess the appetite for these lending products is just going to evolve. A lot of people are going to want to have their cake and eat it too. They're going to want to keep their Bitcoin and post it as collateral in order to access currency to buy an asset, hopefully an appreciating asset, not one that's depreciating. And so, yes, I think that this is an evolving space. I think that there's a lot of people that are curious about this right now, but I just kind of would caution people to take their time. I think that the minute you introduce counterparty to Bitcoin, then, for me, I'm not a big fan of that. Not to say that it's not for certain people in certain situations. But for me, I'm more of an advocate for self-custody, and you just got to be aware that when you post your Bitcoin with a lender as collateral, all of a sudden you introduce counterparty and KYC and all of these other parts to the puzzle. Again, some people are okay with that. It's what they're used to, but I just think right now there's a lot to play out. Not to mention the interest rates. I think 12 to 15% at the moment. If you go to a company like Ledden, for example. So yes, I think it's going to be attractive in the future. But I think as Bitcoin's price really starts to take off, and we see the compounding effects over the next, say, 5 years, and if people are sitting on, a nice stack of Bitcoin that's worth, a lot in terms of fiat dollars, there will be an incentive for people to post a portion of that as collateral to upgrade their home or their lifestyle in some way. But I just caution people to just let this space evolve a little. Be mindful of the fact that Bitcoin right now is probably really undervalued in terms of where it's going to be in 5 years. And so probably the name of the game right now is just to keep your head down and keep stacking and make sure you've got your self custody set up right, and let that arena kind of unfold, evolve a little over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. How do you define money? I know this is something like you were saying this earlier. I wanted to circle back to this for a quick second, that people don't, taking the red pill, understanding money in the first place. These are things that, again, we're not taught in government run schools. Many of us would say purposely. There's such a big part of your life and none of us are taught it. What do you define money as? How do you look at money when you're explaining money to someone?
Yeah, well, I think we have to realize that for 5,000 years, gold was money, and it still is, and it's a great long-term store of value. But I think I really like the way Jack Mallers defines money, and that is our time and energy in abstract form. Money is our time and energy expended in abstract form, and so when you and I go out into the marketplace and we exchange our intellectual knowledge, our skill set, our labor, when we take risk, we run a business, we capitalize that business with inventory and staff and all of these things. We want to know that we're getting an exchange in return for that output that is going to be value that is preserved. And the reality is that that's not what we have right now, because you and I have no say, no vote, no visibility over how much currency is in circulation. And we don't know what it is now, and we don't know what it's going to be tomorrow or next year or the year after that. All we know is that it's continually expanding. The money supply is continuing to expand. And so you have to ask yourself, do you want to save your time and energy in abstract form in a currency that can be printed, that can be corrupted, that there are no rules, there is no integrity, there is no trust? And so that's how I try to get people to see the light, for them to realize. And in many cases, Brandon, I mean, it's for the first time, people just spend their time year in, year out, doing what they're told, going to school, going to college, going to university, getting a good job, maybe getting married, buying a house. 30 years I'm going to work, and then at the end of that, hopefully I'm going to have enough to retire comfortably. I've got my home paid off. I mean, this is the blueprint for a great life. But of course, that's not what we have. And all of it is a function of broken money. And so, I just like to really help unpack and articulate the problems with fiat money, how we've got to this point. I like pointing people to resources like Lynn Alden's video on YouTube, How Money and Banking Work and Why They're Broken Today. I think that's a phenomenal video. The other one from the English gentleman, I can't think of his name, Joe. What's the Problem? That's a great video on YouTube. Really going after what the problem is with fiat money. And, so until people understand that, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Until people understand that the red pill is what they've got to have a clear understanding of in their mind before they can say, well, okay, I understand the problem now. So that's kind of the light bulb moment that I need to go and learn about the solution. Does that answer that for you, bud?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I love Jack Mahler's description of money. Same thing. Like, it's the best non-saleable market good. It's time and energy in an abstracted form. I always go back to time and energy. It's to me, that's Bitcoin is a container for your time and energy, and it's a perfectly finite container, or enclosed a secure container for your finite time and energy, and there's no leaking. And that's how I always explain it. And fiat is that container with a hole in the bottom of it, and that's where the rat race comes in, the rat wheel, and everyone just in a cog in that system. So I always look at it like that. And it's, you could say it's a ledger and a communication device and things like that. And maybe some ancillary, like, 1B, 1C levels of explanation. But that to me is, I don't know why we don't learn that as children, and why we haven't righted that ship, I guess, or fixed that at this point. I understand why government run schools don't teach us that, but at this point, I don't know. Like you said, there's got to be enough people taking the red pill at this point. So the couple of things I want to unpack here. Do you think, you mentioned housing having that 100x boom and just really mirroring the currency printing? Do you think that 100x opportunity are we going to see 100, or is it going to be 50x, 100x, 200x? Do you think there's that 100x opportunity within Bitcoin? Is it still there? Because I know that's a lot of people, that's why they go to altcoins. That's why they're going to other investments, because like, I missed the boat here. What do you see when you look out on the horizon?
Bitcoin has no top because fiat has no bottom. That's the reality. It's a famous Max Kaiser quote. And this is where I like to kind of refer to the geniuses of this space, the likes of Jeff Booth, who have spent countless hours really diving into the intricacies of what Bitcoin is. And the way he explains that today's true inherent value of one Bitcoin is actually $43 million. It's not 100,000, it's 43 million, which sounds absolutely crazy. But the way that we get to that is the realization that this 900 trillion in addressable, the marketplace of addressable market of assets worldwide, everything, currency, stocks, bonds, real estate, you name it, 900 trillion, where people are trying to store their value, and Bitcoin is repricing all of it. When you take 900 trillion and you divide it by the supply of Bitcoin, which we know is only ever going to be a maximum of 21 million, you get 43 million in today's purchasing power, in today's dollars. Are we there yet? No, we're not yet there yet, because the marketplace hasn't woken up to it. But because Bitcoin is the world's first and only truly global free market, which is inherently deflationary, meaning that when you store your time and energy in Bitcoin, over the course of time, the price of everything around you goes down, not up. So it's the opposite of the system that everybody's living in. This is the reality. This is the realization where we start to go, wow, there is no top for Bitcoin. Whether it's 100x in the next 10 years, or again, Peter talks about 1,000x in the next 15. I mean, these guys, they are titans of the Bitcoin space. They have done the work on Bitcoin at a far deeper level than I could ever do. And these are the kind of numbers that these guys talk about, because they understand what Bitcoin is. They understand that it's going to reprice everything. It's going to absorb all of the financial premium out of all of these other asset classes. I mean, you can't tell me that the price of real estate right now is in line with its true value. The way that real estate has been financialized, and we think about all of the layers of wasted premium that go into the price of a house now. The taxes, the stamp duty, the agent fees, the legal fees. All of that stuff is built into the price of a home, but it doesn't represent the value of the home. And if people could just understand that in real estate, yes, you got a house that's being sold for, $1 million, but what's that house really worth? And it's not worth $1 million. It's just what the price is in today's market, but it doesn't represent its true utility value. And so Bitcoin is what brings truth and honesty to this structure, because you start, it basically just takes everything to the marginal cost of production, to its utility value, because we have entrepreneurship, we have competition, we have economies of scale, we have technology, we have all of these things that are true representations of a global free market that constantly are driving prices down, not up. And so the answer to your question, Brandon, is that, when people say, oh, I'm too late, you guys got in early, I didn't get in early to Bitcoin. I mean, shit, I bought some Bitcoin in 2018. The last bit of Bitcoin I bought was last week. I'm still buying Bitcoin. It's like, you just got to understand and zoom out and look at the reality that Bitcoin is up and to the right forever, because it is going to continue to demonetize all of the currencies, the real estate market, stocks, bonds, shares. It's just going to eat everything, because it's designed to do that, And so, I kind of encourage people to not look at the dollar value so much. Yes, I know it's difficult. People want to know, oh, am I only going to get access to, 0.1 of a Bitcoin or 0.01, or I've missed the boat because Bitcoin's now $100,000. I'm better off going and buying, X million XRP or wherever it is, because there's this unit bias thing that kicks into people's psychology. But I just encourage people to not look at it that way. You just look at it in terms of a chunk of dollars that you're putting into Bitcoin that's going to perform at 40 to 50% over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it might be. And don't so much think necessarily about, how much Bitcoin that's bought you. Think in terms of how many bags of Satoshis, for $10,000 right now, you can buy, that's 0.1. So you can buy 10 million sats. There's going to come a time when 10 million sats is parity with the dollar. Now, it might not be in our lifetime, but it is going to happen. So it's just a case of zooming out, understanding that Bitcoin is here to reprice the world. It's actually doing it. You can go back 3 years, 5 years, 10 years and price anything you like in Bitcoin, right? And the more you do that, the more your the light bulb switches on. You develop your conviction. You realize that that this is what's happening. This is what it was designed to do, and it's just going to keep happening, because they're not going to stop expanding the money supply, which basically means that all of that extra liquidity that's floating around is always going to be looking for a home to park itself in. So it's going to park itself in goods and services, and then up the ladder, it's going to park itself in the stock market, and then up the ladder, it's going to park itself in scarce, desirable real estate. But at the apex is Bitcoin, which is the most scarce. So it's going to absorb the most of that financial energy, and that's how I see it, man. And it's a process to get people to understand all of that. But yeah, it's all part of the learning journey.
I love when you have people fighting over, is it going to be $450 trillion? That's the market cap of the total addressable market, or is it 900 trillion? I know Jeff Booth is saying 900 trillion. Jack Muller's saying 450. It's one half of every transaction. So I love that. I'm not the guy. It's not above my pay grade to figure out who's right. But suffice it to say, like you said, there's massive opportunity in there. For someone getting in now, and I was talking to Parker Lewis about that recently, and the theme of his talk, it's not even out yet, but the theme of that talk is closing your bank account will help you retire early. And it's obviously a play on words, but people have to understand, like, using dollars or using fiat currencies are just making you poor. And it goes back to the little EDM house song that the rapper or the DJ made about Michael Saylor. Saving in fiat currency is, we call you poor. We have a word for you, when he snapped on that lady when he was doing the interview. And it's kind of that point where it's like, what are we doing here? Like, why is this still this conversation? Like, there's so much information available. How are people not seeing this? With all that being said, though, do you think, because Jeff Booth always talks about this as well, and I think it's a great caveat, meaning, hey, I'm right. I've done the homework. I'm right. But there's a caveat. If Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure, because we know if it keeps going the way it is, stays decentralized and secure, it's going to do the things you have outlined here, Zane. It's going to do these things because it's mathematically designed to go up, because it's perfectly finite, opposite of the fiat system. How do we know, though? And I'm sure you get this question, because I get it. I see it in YouTube comments. I'm sure you get it in YouTube comments, whether it's there's fair distribution or they're going to print more, things of that nature. How do you combat that when someone's saying that to you, it's a family or friend, or you're getting it on YouTube? What are you directing them to? How are you teaching someone that's having these questions of, yeah, but there's going to be the next one, or there's going to be it won't last forever. Governments will, they'll rug pull you at some point. When you're kind of crossing some of these objections, how do you handle them?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually don't handle them. Most of the time, the people I kind of engage with, they're already, they've already at the base level of having done the work, and they're like, yeah, we love this. We just know that we could be doing more. We need to get our retirement account involved in this. Where do we go to get that done? How do we stack more? What's a great strategy? Is it dollar cost average? Is it rotating out of other underperforming assets? It's so it's I can't really answer that, man, because I just don't tend to engage too deeply with those objections. I always revert to encouraging people just to learn about money, and I think once they learn about money, which we've kind of already discussed, and all of the pitfalls of it, it kind of naturally opens up the question, well, what now? And then that causes people to go on a hunt to learn more about Bitcoin. I mean, I'm not the most technical guy when it comes to the inner workings of the Bitcoin protocol. I mean, I spend time looking in the mempool and understanding
Right.
the blocks, and when transactions are moving, it's interesting to watch in real time. If you're transferring values somewhere, it's great to do all that. That's kind of next level stuff that people will naturally get to on their Bitcoin journey. But I think just knowing that those tools exist, where you can actually,
It's open source. Everything's available.
You can actually dive in to the blockchain. When you run your own node, and you'd realize that you actually have a copy of the entire thing, of every transaction that there's ever been, and you've got access to that. This is all accessible. This is open source. This is what Bitcoin's designed to be. Don't trust, verify. And so, but I think we've got to be careful not to go into too many high level conversations with people who are sort of just trying to attack Bitcoin and go after it because maybe, it's an out clause for them to actually put in the work themselves. I mean, you and I both know that there are so many levels to this thing, so many rabbit holes you can go down, and maybe those objections are easily answered if you kind of start unpacking, but it's kind of difficult in the social media world, YouTube. I just find that, if I'm having a conversation with somebody who's absolutely new to Bitcoin, just wanting to learn about it, I think there's some phenomenal resources out there, which we've already touched on, that I tend to point people to, just to get them thinking about the problems with money, why it's broken, and then to kind of assess their own personal life through that lens. understanding, well, yeah, money is broken. I've never really thought of that. Never really thought that my house has only really just kept up with inflation. I never really thought that there's a lot of wasted premium in real estate. I've never really thought that every time a bank issues a mortgage, they're just creating new debt, which is basically driving inflation. They're not borrowing it off you and I as depositors. They're just basically producing a new, bunch of currency out into the marketplace. And of course, this is why we see real estate prices going up, because it's continually being driven by inflation. So, look, the objections are, I don't have time for them, to be honest with you. I mean, I just keep moving on. I'm more interested in talking to people who want to learn, want to grow. I know the objections are always natural for us to have in the beginning, but I think a lot of the people who kind of just shoot from the hip and say, "Oh, the government's going to ban it," or "It's bad for the environment," or "It's a Ponzi scheme," or "Bitcoin's going to zero, buy XRP instead." They're just people who are trying to ruffle your feathers, having a bad day, haven't done the work, and they need to do that, because if you're able to have a conversation with them from a base of, okay, I've read the big print, or I've listened to some of these documentaries on YouTube, and okay, now I'm curious, right? And if they came from a place of being curious, well, then you can show them, okay, now let's have a look at the blockchain. Now let me show you how you can actually see transactions, how you can, not just trust that this is happening, but this is real. You can verify. But that's high level stuff that most people are not ready for, particularly people who are haven't done the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more with you. There's got to be a level of buy-in, right? First, and you got to pay the ante, right? If someone's a poker player, if someone listening is a poker player or something like that, or knows about poker, right? Like, you got to have some kind of skin in the game. I've shown some willingness, which makes me think of the Satoshi quote of, if you don't get it, I don't have time to teach you. Like, you got to come with some willingness. You can't shoot from the hip, like you said. And we spoke about Bitcoin being mathematically designed to go up. That used to confuse the hell out of me like 10 years ago when I heard that. I was like, what are you talking about? I think Max Kaiser would say that all the time. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I realized, like you said earlier, there's no, I don't know when it was, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it kind of like dawned on me of like, duh, it's designed to go up forever because the dollar is going down forever, or fiat currencies will go to zero. So there's no top to Bitcoin. And you said that beautifully earlier. And so it just made me think of that. And I was just kind of like laughing to myself, because that was one of my own little things where I didn't get it 10 years ago or in 2015 or 16, where I was like, what are they talking about? Like, I was a real estate guy and a gold and silver guy. And I was a hockey player that turned into, hey, I had a business, saving in gold and silver and buying real estate and flipping it and refinancing it and doing all these, jumping through all these hoops, trying to make it in the fiat system. And it's funny, I think of the Hal quote as well, of it's either going to 10 million or it's going to zero. And it doesn't seem like it's going to zero. And so it just kind of encapsulates all the things we're talking about of, clearly it's going that other direction where it's going to start eating the world. And my question to you is, number one, there's only 250,000 sats available, the divisible unit for someone listening, of 100 million. There's 100 million in each Bitcoin, and there's 250,000 sats available for every person on Earth. So that just goes to show you kind of where we're at in this game. But do you think, I mean, we're talking 0.1 Bitcoin now. It was 6.15 American Hodl's meme, over the last 4 or 5 years. Now we're at, get to 1 Bitcoin. British Hodl talks about that all the time. Now we're getting to 0.1 Bitcoin. Are we 4, 5, 6 years? Are we going to be talking, an epoch or two from now? Are we going to be talking 0.01 Bitcoin, 0.001 Bitcoin? Because the game keeps going forever. So is that where we're going to be just naturally?
Yeah, I think so, because like I said, when you're pricing Bitcoin in fiat currency, that's what's happening. It's just going to continue to absorb that fiat currency, and for as long as everybody's working for that fiat currency, and it's not keeping up with true inflation, the price of entry to Bitcoin, it's unfortunately it's just going to get more and more expensive. I mean, you can look at the chart, of of how many Satoshis you can buy for $1. And since inception, it's just absolutely like that. So it's just going to continue, Brandon. And this is why there is this saying, and we keep harping on it, that people get Bitcoin at the price they deserve, because the amount of Satoshis that you're going to be able to acquire is going to be less and less and less over time. Yes, we're going to have, 5, 10, 15, 20% pullbacks and corrections on the way, and you might have a lucky day and you can buy 15, 20% more sats than you could last month. But again, that's a mindset. It's like realizing that if Bitcoin's price dips by 20%, you want to be ready to dive in and take advantage of that, because that's Bitcoin on sale, because it's not going to be on sale forever, right? And so, and I think back to my experience when I first entered Bitcoin, 2018 in January. I think maybe 2-3 weeks after that, the price dipped, not 20, I think it dipped by about 30%. Because I'd done some base level work, I knew that I was being in Bitcoin for the long haul. I wasn't in getting involved to trade it or try and time the market or anything like that. I saw that 20, 30% correction as an opportunity to buy more. And so over the course of time, the dollar cost averaging of lump summing into Bitcoin has really stood me in good stead. So I don't mind buying it now at 100,000, right? Because over the course of time, my entry point is what it is. But yeah, it's I think over time we're going to go from 1 Bitcoin to 0.25 to 0.1 to 0.01. I've said to my kids, I said, each and every one of you guys, the goal for you in the next 18 months is to get to 0.1, right? Which today is around about $10,000. And the reason for that is because when you put that into the reverse Kager calculator, which I encourage everybody to jump on Google and just type in reverse Kager calculator, and it's a phenomenal little tool. It's just got 3 fields that you need to input some data, and it helps to plot where you might be in 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now. And when you're thinking about retirement, or you're a young person in their, say, 20s, and you're thinking, well, I can't afford to buy a house. Everything's getting more expensive. I can't afford to raise a family. So where can I put my money that's going to actually help me get ahead? And you and I both know Bitcoin's the answer. But so whether you're at sort of in your middle stages of life thinking about retirement, or your early stages of life just looking to build your future, this can be a great tool, because if you've got a 10, 15 year, 20 year time horizon, you can start to really articulate, okay, some what if scenarios. Bitcoin the last 10 years has done 55 to 60%. Okay, so what if it does 50% over the next 15 years? If you buy 0.1 today, $10,000 at 50% Kager, in 15 years, that's 4.3 million US dollars, which is around about 7 million Australian dollars. And so once people realize that, and they go, well, okay, I don't have to give away the farm. I don't have to fully uproot my life, right? If I put my head down and I maybe go without a few things, or I sell some stuff that I don't need, or maybe I've got a rental property that's giving me the shits because the tenants are always upset, or they're not paying their rent on time, or I'm sick of the maintenance, I'm sick of the land tax, I'm sick of the rates and all these things that are going on. Okay, what are you going to do? Rotate some of that capital into Bitcoin. Now you might be able to buy 0.25. Maybe you can buy 0.5. So you can put this whole thing on steroids, right? And whether it does 50%, 40%, 30%, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's going to seriously outperform anything else that you can put your money in. In particular, your superannuation fund or your 401k. So yeah, that's kind of how I kind of help people to see what's possible with this thing, and I find it's great because they can play around with it themselves, put in a few scenarios themselves. You and I both know we can't predict what the uh, future CAGR of Bitcoin is going to be. There's people like Michael Saylor who have publicly said that they think it's going to be 29% for the next 20 years. That's his base case, which I think would take us to a $13 million Bitcoin in 20 years, in 2045. But then there's people like Peter Dunworth, who says, no, Bitcoin's it's going to 100x in the next 10 years, and it's going to 1,000x in the next 15. So, look, I think any way you look at this, Brandon, it becomes really clear that everybody needs some allocation to Bitcoin. And if you can get to that 0.1 as quickly as possible before the exchange rate gets out of reach, taking your fiat currency and exchanging it for a hard form of money, before that gets out of reach, you want to get to that 0.1 as a minimum as quickly as you can. And I think that most people of my age group, and I know this because I talk to a lot of people of my age group, if they really put their mind to it, they can achieve that, And I know $10,000 in today's world, for a lot of people, that's a struggle to put their hands on that kind of savings or capital. I get that. But how bad do you care about your financial future? What are you prepared to do to make this thing happen? What things can you go without for the next 18 months to enable this? And so it's as much a mental game and personal development game as it is, just about 0.1 or whatever it might be.
How long do you think that these systems last? Like, how long do you think the dollar is around? I the last few months I've been asking, Samson and Pierre and Peter, a bunch of people that have been on the pod, and like, when does it go no bid, when people won't accept it anymore? And people are just like, yeah, I'm not accepting these dollars for Bitcoin. And the reason I ask that as well is because you have this world where we obviously live in fiat and the Bitcoin world. Many of us Bitcoiners, we live in both these worlds. We have to operate in that world. For the average person, it seemingly is very tough for them to figure that out. You get a lot of people like, well, can you buy groceries at the grocery store with Bitcoin? And it's very hard for people to live simultaneously, or for two things to be true for many people. And then you get the deflation question of, well, you can't have deflation. Like, it's a neutral money that captures deflation, as Jeff Booth always says, right? It's a neutral money that captures deflation and captures that technological growth and disperses that back to all of us, instead of the fiat world dispersing inflation back on all of us and higher prices and higher costs. So can we live, in your mind, can we live in that world where we can have true deflation and prices continually fall to their marginal cost of utility and live in this world? And then also, where do you think that time frame lies where we're kind of transitioning from this old world to this new world?
That's a tough question. I mean, I'd love to say it can happen in our lifetime, if not, sooner than that. And it may well. I mean, it may well. We see throughout history that, there are things that seemingly nobody's paying attention to, happen gradually, but then all of a sudden, it just takes this all of a sudden overnight mass adoption crisis. We saw, COVID, what happened, it just kind of flipped. All of a sudden now we're doing these podcasts now on opposite sides of the world, on Zoom and Riverside and things like that. Like 5-6 years ago, we never really would have thought about doing that. We were still, it was still a really new thing. And so, I think with the adoption of Bitcoin and the fact that we're on that trajectory that is very similar to, I've seen these charts and these graphs that show that, we're still at 3 to 5% global adoption in Bitcoin. And when you compare that to, say, the iPhone or the internet. I think that, and I know there's others that have kind of said this. I feel like we're kind of at that 1999, 1999 time frame in terms of where we are on the Bitcoin adoption curve, which basically means that was 25, 26 years ago. And so maybe it takes that amount of time. But I think the whole thing that can accelerate this is a flight to safety. I really believe that if we have another pandemic, or we have a world war, or we have CBDCs rolling out, and maybe Europe's going to be the test bed for this, with this $10 trillion strategic reallocation, which essentially means that they're going to be seizing, savings from the people. If all of that really happens, I just think it's going to wake a lot of people up. Now, the big challenge is going to be, how do people access their money, right? Because, we're already seeing here in Australia that, getting your money, in some cases, out of the country onto Bitcoin exchanges, withdrawing cash from a bank, all of these things are all of a sudden becoming more challenging. And, even with that, and it's not just in the Bitcoin ecosystem that we're hearing about these things, we're actually hearing about them on talkback radio shows and, on the mainstream news. And yet it would seem that most people are still asleep at the wheel. So I think we're going to transition into a parallel economy first. I think that it's already happening. I think that people who can exchange value and accept Satoshis for their services, I think we're going to see that more and more when you have applications like Zaprite and Square that enable that. I just think this is what's going to happen, and it's not going to be noticed. It's not going to be mainstream. It's just going to be one of those things that people start to pick up on. And then we're going to have a crisis moment where people opt out. And I don't know where that's going to be, Brandon. I mean, if you had said to me in 2019 that, next year we're going to have this thing and we're going to have to stand 6 feet apart and put nappies on our faces and rub this shit on our hands before we can go to the supermarket and all this stuff, like, I would have said you're crazy. So we know these things can and do happen, and maybe there's another one coming, but there's people in this space that are a lot more tuned into monetary history, the life cycle of fiat currencies, the inner workings of these central banks and what's going on, that are probably better equipped to answer when this transition is likely to be. But for me, it's all about opting out sooner rather than later, starting to transact in Bitcoin as much as you possibly can. In Australia, that's difficult right now because, the powers that be that run this country, they are just absolutely have their head in the sand when it comes to this asset class. But that doesn't mean that, we still can't function peer-to-peer globally and do it in that way. But fun times ahead, man. Fun times ahead.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And the beauty of Bitcoin is, like the American founding. I talk a lot about the American founding and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, what it gave people, at least inside the walls of America. Now we have, to a large extent, outside of the rest of the world now with Bitcoin. If you own Bitcoin, you now have private property. You now have these rights that no one can take away from you. And these are these things that just have never, humans have not just, or not used to. I mean, like, let's be frank with it. I mean, this is something very radical and very different that is upon people. And so I think that that's what's going to be fascinating as people start really becoming educated on this. Do you think, and I'm going to segue a little bit to back to price to a degree here. Do you think we have any price suppression going on? Like, do you suspect there's any? It's weird saying at $100,000 US, but I know there's many people in the space that think that there's funny games being played, and maybe the better question is not necessarily like, do you think there is or not, but we saw what happened with FTX, Celsius, Terra Luna, a bunch of these. If you FAFO, if you F around, you find out. Is that kind of going back to like Bitcoin trains you? It doesn't, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Is this going to happen in your mind going forward? We're going to see more of these blowups maybe as things go up and down, but it's going to train society that, hey, you can't mess around with this long term. You can play around a little bit, but you're going to get burned at some point. Do you see that kind of just continually playing out as people learn, as society learns what this asset class is?
Yeah, I do. I mean, unfortunately, people love to gamble, as we know, and people are being forced, kind of, in some respects, down this path because they know that they need to do something, and in order to keep up, because everybody knows intuitively that things aren't right. Everybody. I defy anyone to kind of suggest that even people who have done exceptionally well over the last 5 years during this hyperinflationary period where we've seen where we live, some of the real estate prices around here have just been absolutely crazy. Like people have like tripled and quadrupled their money in the last 5 years, and I mean, we live in a beachside area, so it's highly kind of desirable in that sense. But even those people, they've got to know that things aren't right. And even when you create a division, they might be doing okay, but the reality is they have family members or kids or relatives that they can see are being affected by this inflationary system. And so, I think that as people start to realize what Bitcoin is, and the fact that you can get exposure to Bitcoin through an ETF or through buying MicroStrategy, or you can sort of play funny games with lending platforms, and you can say, well, I'm better off buying a cryptocurrency because it's more likely to 10x in the next 12 months than Bitcoin is. All of these things that people have to rationalize with and deal with in their mind who are entering this space. It's tough, because it's there's a lot to take in. People have to do the work on Bitcoin to realize that it's really a safe haven, because when you do it right, because it's not just about exposure to Bitcoin. Like, I get a lot of people saying to me, oh, look, I don't really want the complexity of having to worry about being a custodian for the asset or setting up collaborative custody. And they say, well, what do you recommend? Should I just get exposure to the ETF? And, I think that if all you're here for is number go up, and you genuinely are fearful or not prepared to put in the time to actually learn how to do this next step, which is the sovereignty side of it, then go ahead. I mean, we know that Bitcoin is the fastest horse in the race, and so if that's all you care about, then go for it. But I just encourage everybody to not just come here for number go up. Try to stay away from all of this noise. And I know at the Bitcoin conference last week, I was watching some of the clips, and it's all so much about stable coins and all of that is for me, it's just noise.
And stable coins.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, it's what people see, it's what they hear, and it creates just all of this narrative and confusion, and for new people entering the space in particular, I think it's really hard for them to kind of be able to put all that to the side and just focus on what really matters, and that is to acquire this asset as quickly as you can and to put it into self-custody. And so, look, for me, all of that it's just noise. I don't, like I said, I have an ear to the ground, but I don't pay too much attention to all of it, because I think it's a distraction from what the average person should really be doing. And that is learning about Bitcoin, growing your knowledge, growing your conviction, allocating to Bitcoin in a meaningful way as quickly as you can, and being here not just for number go up, but being here for the freedom technology. So that's how I see it, man.
I would love for you to unpack this just for a minute in the importance of, because I know you are a big advocate of self-custody and getting your coins off exchanges. We talked about this earlier with the California. Again, I'm not an expert in California politics or anything by any means, but it was just something about if it's been there for 3 years and you don't have it off exchanges, they're going to take it. I heard some people call them BS on that, whatever. But moral of the story is, whether it's a 6102 style event here in America, that's happened before, not even 100 years ago, the government taking gold, whatever it may be. All these things have happened in history. So I'd love for you to touch on the importance of self-custody and really the innovation that is. So I know it's something that you are a big advocate of. So I'd love for you to just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So when I think of Bitcoin, it promises two things. It promises, and this is if you do it right, okay? It promises wealth acceleration because it's mathematically engineered to go up forever, because we know it's finite, absolutely scarce. That's the first promise. The second promise, and this is where most people miss it, is where most people fall down. The second promise is wealth protection. And we live in a world now where wealth protection is becoming not just more important, but I believe critical for everybody. Not just the average person, but even high net worth people. And we're seeing attacks now on superannuation in this country. We had some cyber attack stuff go on with some big industry super funds just maybe 2 months ago, and then that was closely followed by this announcement that this new or this incumbent government is going to bring in a new tax program on retirement accounts. And so they're going to bring in unrealized gains. And so people have done everything that they've been told to do their whole life, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, saving into these retirement accounts, because the government set up a program about 40 odd years ago in this country to basically let everyone know that, look, we can't guarantee the pension's going to be there when you get to retirement age, so we want you to save for your own retirement. And now they want to tax those retirement savings on a number that they say is what the value of that asset is every single year. And even though you haven't realized that gain, they want to put their hand into your retirement account to take their pound of flesh. And so how all of this ties into self-custody is because so many people don't realize that when they had their assets in this centralized system, the financial planning industry, their accountants with brokers, on these exchanges, all of these things, they're exposed to that central control system, the counterparty, the risk of capital controls. If we ever have another crisis situation, which everybody should be rationalizing that it's very, very possible, particularly in this geopolitical, this uncertain economic world that we live in. I mean, nobody can be honest with themselves and say everything's stable. I mean, we know that something could happen tomorrow and, they could close access to the banking system. Financial markets could shut down tomorrow. There's a whole bunch of things that could happen that could really shake up people's lives. And so this is the reason why I'm a huge believer that self-custody is the ultimate solution, because being in control of your money with no counterparty risk and being able to be portable with that asset, so that if you had to go to a better jurisdiction, if you had to leave an untenable situation that was going in your country, and you had to go overnight. Things like that. You can't divest yourself from traditional assets in a hurry if you need to do those kinds of things. And I know this is an extreme situation, but we just have to understand that it's incumbent on us, if we care about our future and being very conscious of where things are going, to actually take these proactive steps to protect, if not all, then some meaningful portion of our financial lives. And the only way you can do that is with self-custody, because you don't rely on any other individual in order to do that. So I'm big on encouraging people to set themselves up with um, cold storage, air gapped Bitcoin only wallets, open source, those kinds of things. There's a handful of devices on the market that are brilliant in that regard. And a lot of people just aren't aware of that, Brandon. They've done step one, which is make a choice to get involved in this asset, but unfortunately they're falling down with step two, which is to actually get that asset into their hands so that they own the private keys, not the exchange. And the more people who take that step, the better off they're going to be. Because if the worst case scenario happens and they need to skip town, or they need access to their bank account or their finances, and there's capital controls in the system and they can't access their money, well, life's good because you have access to your money in the form of self-custody. So it's a big deal, man. It's a big deal. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't really doing the work on that step, because I think we've become very complacent and used to the fact that we can go to the ATM and get our money, or we can go down to the bank and, withdraw, or get online and do a transfer. But we have to understand that, be it Cyprus in 2013 or in Lebanon in 2019, these things can turn bad very, very quickly. And we even saw in your country, in what, 2022 or 23, with the Silicon Valley banks there, and that should have been a wake-up call. So exchanges, FTX, Celsius, people who unfortunately entrusted these exchanges to custody their wealth, their Bitcoin, look what happened. So I think it's a message that needs to really be advocated a lot more than currently is being done in the Bitcoin space, and that's what I really focus on when I'm talking to people.
Boy, I hope that it does more, and you just hope that we all don't have to touch the stove many more times before we learn. And for me, and I want to talk about Sailor in a minute with you, because you touched on Sailor and MicroStrategy. But first, I want to talk about what was the moment, what was the thing that really clicked for you when it came to Bitcoin? For me, it was a couple things. One of them was the self-custody. It was three things. The self-custody aspect of realizing, when you understood self-custody of your Bitcoin, holding your keys to the coins on the time chain, and only you had those, that to me was mind-blowing, because then it really put into perspective every other asset, and you realize, I don't own any other asset. You literally don't own any other asset, unless you maybe have some physical gold or silver on you, or whatever it is, your possessions around you, your home, you pay taxes to the government, your stocks is some digital certificate or digital thing that they could just censor you. I mean, on and on. The dollars all could be confiscated in you with the click of a button, or frozen. And you realize you don't own any of these things until you understand Bitcoin and self-custody. So that was a mind blower for me. And then seeing the log chart of Bitcoin, and not just a linear chart of like, oh, it's just going up and down like every other asset. And you realize, oh, it's a network. It's a monetary network. And it's actually just going up and to the right. And then the third one was holding your wealth in your head and being able to literally custody it in your mind and travel anywhere theoretically in the universe with your wealth in your head. Those three things over the course of the last 10 years, or maybe, 5 to 10 years ago, were the things that really orange pilled me and just got me hook, line, and sinker. What were those moments for you when you look back?
Yeah, I think the first one was definitely getting Bitcoin from an exchange into self-custody for the first time. Just, that moment where your heart kind of sinks and it's in the pit of your gut. You're like, holy shit, is this Bitcoin going to arrive? Because it doesn't happen instantly, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, if I sent
So
this
true.
to the right place, and you're kind of double guessing yourself, and then, 10, 12 minutes later, bang, you get the notification and here it is. And for me, that was a huge light bulb moment, just to actually feel that sense of freedom, autonomy, sovereignty, whatever it was. And we know there's more steps to it than that. But I think if everybody could just take even that step, just to, take, 1,000,000 sats or 500,000 sats or whatever it is from the exchange into self custody, that first step of actually seeing that happen and knowing that nobody can take that away from you because you have the private key. Like you said, you've got the seed phrase in your head and hopefully stored offline in a safe location somewhere. And, with that portion of wealth.
If you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
Or money or whatever you want to call it. You are sovereign, you are portable. You can basically take that globally recognized, highly liquid asset that you absolutely own. Nobody can take it away from you, with you anywhere in the world. And you don't even need to take the hardware device with you. So long as you have the seed phrase, job's good. You can go to El Salvador or to, somewhere in Europe or in the United States from here. And you can just basically download an app, put in your seed phrase, and away you go. You've got your Bitcoin. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. So that was number one. And I think number two was moving Bitcoin myself for the first time. So once I had it from the exchange and then moving it to another entity, another wallet, another device, because I've transitioned over time to a different solution. But just realizing that there's no friction, it's just you transferring from point A to point B. That was a big moment. And then I think the third one was quite recently, where, running your own node and being able to download an entire copy of the blockchain, and then, going into mempool.space and actually seeing that transaction sitting in the mempool awaiting verification. That to me was really powerful as well. And again, this is kind of getting into the more advanced side of things, but this is what Bitcoin does to you. Like over time, as you go down this rabbit hole and you learn and you start experiencing peer-to-peer transfer and moving your value into self-custody and then you go to the next step, which is, okay, how do I now join the network? How do I, don't trust but now verify, run my own node? How do I, become one of these, tools in this global network that helps to secure the network, that helps to ensure the authenticity and the integrity of the network. And so I want to contribute to that. And that's what running your own node enables you to do. And also the privacy aspect of that. So, it's a constant learning journey. And it's, I try not to, when I'm talking to people, give them too much to think about at once, because, we all know that complexity is the enemy of execution. So if things are too seemingly complex for people, if there's 5 steps they got to think about instead of 1 or 2, they probably will do nothing, right? So, so just getting people to take that first step, get your Bitcoin off an exchange into self-custody. If that means a software wallet to begin with, so be it. While you're waiting for your hardware device to arrive, that's a great step, and then, getting into air-gapped wallets, cold storage, open source, Bitcoin only, these kinds of things would be the next step. Some people, I think there is a case for collaborative custody for certain individuals and scenarios, and obviously companies having Bitcoin on their balance sheet, it can't be in the hands of a self-custody custodian. So in that situation, but for me, it's all about self-custody. And the other thing is that being able to actually do it in a way whereas if something happens to you, there's a succession plan. Because I think a lot of Bitcoiners too, they worry if they are in self-custody and they are the only ones that has access to their seed phrase, their passphrase, what then? If a plane falls out of the sky, you got hit by a bus tomorrow, is your Bitcoin lost? And so there's ways that you can do it through a simple process where you can actually do everything properly, so that you are in self-custody, there is no counterparty risk, and you have a succession plan. And so again, this is an area that is more advanced, but people just need to know that one step at a time, and then you get to the ultimate goal, which in my mind is becoming self-sovereign.
We talked about lending earlier, and some of your thoughts on that, and some of the new products that are coming out, and obviously whether it's Strike or Jack Mallers, there's all these different products that are coming out. I would love for you, and we talked about Sailor. I would love just a minute on Sailor and your thoughts on MicroStrategy, what they're doing, all the different options they have. I mean, really squeezing the legacy system for all it's worth at this point. And I'm sure there's more they're going to come up with and come out with in the coming weeks and months here, but them just kind of wringing every single last drop out of the legacy system and utilizing the power of Bitcoin combined with the legacy system. And then the raft, as Dr. Jeff said a month ago when I spoke to him, he's like, there's a whole raft of imitators coming to do exactly this, opening up funds. We're seeing it all over the place now. People opening up funds to raise money, be little junior Warren Buffetts in essence. Take a bunch of money here that's float or whatever. People are just raising money, or not insurance float necessarily, but different ways people are utilizing to now come into this trade of Bitcoin. So I'd love you to unpack this for a minute, just your thoughts on everything in that space that's happening in the corporate treasury world.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Michael Saylor. I mean, in the last 5 years, I can't even imagine how many videos and interviews and that I've listened to. I mean, he is, in my mind, has been and still is probably the loudest voice in the Bitcoin space. And in terms of furthering your Bitcoin knowledge and education and what this asset represents, I think we can all agree that he's probably number one and has been for the past few years. I guess, I don't spend a lot of time studying, the financial engineering side of things and the way that he's able to, to access capital at what, close to zero in order to acquire Bitcoin, and I kind of understand a little bit the early stages of why he went into Bitcoin, and the fact that MicroStrategy was a 30-year-old sort of company that was really going nowhere, and what did it have in the bank? Was it 500 million or something in 2020?
Yep.
Yeah, and he realized that he's on a fast kind of death to nowhere with that amount of cash in the bank, and
the melting ice cube was kind of that was his thing.
So all of that, and seeing him be the first, to really go after Bitcoin as a treasury asset, and then the fact that he gave his shareholders the opportunity to sell out at a premium or to stay in for this journey, and those that have stayed in have obviously done very, very well. I know that there's people out there, the likes of George Bodine. I'm a huge fan of George, and he's studied this a lot more than I have, and he's a great believer that Strategy B is going to become the world's first Bitcoin bank. But then you listen to Saylor, and very recently someone asked him if that's his goal, and he said, well, no, we're just going to build products on top of Bitcoin. So I don't know where this is all going. I actually thought that, yes, it's quite clear that Strategy B is just going to become a Bitcoin bank, and play fiat games on top of Bitcoin. So I don't know, man. But what I know is that I've started to sort of transition my thinking in relation to Bitcoin a lot more in the last probably 6 to 12 months, in the sense that, Michael Saylor is a massive advocate for, owning Bitcoin for 100 years or 1,000 years and never selling it. And, why would you ever sell the best asset on earth to go into what, for the second best or the third best, or heaven forbid, a fiat currency? And I do get all of that. But the thing that worries me is this nagging realization that Bitcoin was designed to actually be a medium of exchange. And I know that Satoshi sacrificed speed for decentralization and security. And I think Hal Finney and those early players, they spoke about this. We have to sacrifice something for this. Yep. And so on the base layer, we understand that Bitcoin as a transactional medium of exchange, monetary instrument, it's not going to work, right? It's just far too slow. But we know that we have these layer 2 solutions that are going to enable all of that. And so the only thing I worry about when it comes to Michael Saylor, I can't really speak to the financial engineering and how all of that works. It's way above my pay grade. And I do understand that, there's Metaplanet and 21 Capital, and they're all kind of lining up to do the same stuff. But, I just worry that it's going to kind of move us away from what I keep saying, and that is that we need to be focused on the fact that Bitcoin is sovereign money, it's people's money. It was designed to be the life raft, the escape hatch from these fiat games, from this debt-based system. And I just don't want people to get so swept up in, is MicroStrategy outperforming Bitcoin? I better put my money into that, because you don't really own the Bitcoin. So, yeah, I hope that kind of gives you some perspective on my take. I love Michael Saylor. He's a genius. I could listen to him all day, all week, all night. I could listen to him forever. but I just worry that sometimes, I think about where this is all going, and the fact that maybe we're moving away from what really Bitcoin was designed to do, and that there's enough solutions coming, these layer 2s, that are going to enable us to actually utilize Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, not just a store of value. And it doesn't just mean selling the worst asset in order to go and buy an ice cream. It's not about that. It's just understanding that we can actually function in a parallel economy, right, where we can exchange value in Bitcoin. And so that's what I would like to see. And I just worry that people who only spend their time listening to what's going on in that, financialization, engineering space of Bitcoin, they're kind of missing the hallmarks of what Bitcoin truly represents and maybe getting distracted from that. And this is why I keep returning to, the likes of Jeff Booth and, Tony Asbeck and these people, because they bring you back to center with what Bitcoin is meant to be. So yeah, that's my take.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this is the nuance of Bitcoin. And we've talked about this layers, and just this whole talk has been about personal development, personal growth, the layers, understanding, learning. And that's really a story of life to a large degree. But this is one of those things here too, where one of the definitions of genius, at least in my book, is coming from that personal development world, is being able to hold two opposing opinions in your head at the same time. And being able to accept that and adapt and say, yes, that is true. Two things can be true at one time. And like you just outlined, we have to get back to this idealistic world of, hey, we want all the plebs in there, as many as possible. We got to be educating on the right ethics, morals, values of how this should be, while at the same time understanding that Michael Saylor is doing amazing good for it. He's probably, like you said, orange pilled and educated more people on Bitcoin than anybody at this point now, after 5 years of him being, or almost 5 years, him being in the space. So I think that, but there comes risk with that. There's trade-offs of life, right? So it's like people, him doing his job of, hey, I have a public company, I'm doing what I can to acquire more Bitcoin. It's also can lead people down this path where maybe you're getting astray of the ethos of Bitcoin and the cypherpunk ethos. So, but that we know that was always going to be the end game, where the Trojan horse has to get inside the walls at some point of the government or whatever. I mean, Hal, like you said, Hal, the early cypherpunks talked about this very thing. So it's not that no one's thought of it, but it's just understanding two things can be true. So I love the way you put that. It's just so nuanced. What is the most fascinating aspect of Bitcoin to you? Like, what's the biggest innovation in Bitcoin? Is it the self-custody aspect? Is it proof of work? Tying the digital world to physical energy? Is the difficulty adjustment? Capturing the first time we've had a money where we can capture our finite time and energy in this perfect container and hold it. What's the thing to you that's the most fascinating, the most intriguing part of Bitcoin itself?
Yeah, I think all those things, Brandon. I mean, for me, I just keep coming back to the fact that is the only truly finite asset and monetary protocol that we've ever seen. And even gold we know has a 2% inflation rate, and so when you're able to actually protect and preserve your financial energy into a monetary protocol that cannot be debased, that cannot be printed, that cannot be corrupted, that to me is transformational stuff. That has the ability to change the world and our incentive structure and the ability for us to return to how life's meant to be. And that is not working our ass off for 50 years and then waking up one day and realizing that we haven't got enough to support ourselves for the rest of our life. Not looking at our kids in their 20s and saying, well, we're sorry we sold out the future for you guys because we extracted all of the value and the wealth out of the housing system so that you guys can't afford a home. All of these issues now that are a function of broken money and that realization that we now have a choice to opt in a new direction, to opt out of that system and to start storing our value in a system that respects us, honors us, has integrity, is based on truth, has rules, but no rulers. that for me is the biggest reason for people to be paying attention to Bitcoin. And I think once people understand that one thing, and the fact that life is not meant to be, a mouse on a wheel in the rat race for, 30, 40, 50 years, and then waking up one day and realizing that you just did all this for nothing. It's not to say that some people don't build phenomenal lives for themselves and create a massive difference in the world and create great wealth. And yes, we know all that, but the Bitcoin is a system of money where everybody gets to win, and we just have to understand that the more that we start moving in this direction, and you and I both know that it doesn't matter whether you or I are in Bitcoin or not. Bitcoin can't be stopped. Like, Bitcoin really doesn't care whether we're in. I'm sure Bitcoin, if it was an entity that could actually talk to us, it would be very grateful for the fact that it doesn't have a marketing department, and you and I are here on opposite sides of the world, sharing knowledge with people, helping to educate, helping to drive people to this sound money. But it's just that realization, that people, if people could only see that life doesn't have to be difficult. It's not meant to be hard. We're not meant to be trading our time and energy for a currency that is broken, and now we have a choice. And I think everything else from that is a process to learn and develop a skill set. It's a basic skill set to understand, okay, what do you do after that? I get it. I understand this is sound money. I'm going to start moving towards that. That's step one. And then from there, once you've got that knowledge, that conviction, that understanding that this is where the world is going, you can start moving into the other steps that help you to become self-sovereign, which is ultimately what Bitcoin is designed for. It's freedom money. And I think as time goes on, the world's going to wake up to this.
For those that are 35 years older, maybe 35, 40 years old and up, could even say, Gen X, boomers, what would be your words of advice if there are those that are hesitant to jump into Bitcoin, whether they think, they hear thousands of hours of work, learning, education, people might be intimidated by that and all that goes into that. What would be your words of advice or encouragement to someone that's, like we were talking offline earlier about trying to get people to help them retire early, retire with dignity, actually have a retirement, not even to retire wealthy, but just to have it, because we know what fiat and governments, we know what that end game looks like. So what would be your advice to someone kind of looking out and saying, I wonder if I'm gonna be able to do that someday?
Yeah, I think, in terms of round numbers, I think everybody who's at this stage in their life who wants to live a comfortable retirement and never have to worry about money again, and I think we all deserve that. Most people have done all the right things over the course of their life. And if they've got to, their mid-30s, 40s, even 50s, and they're kind of starting to contemplate, the meaning of life, have I done the right things in terms of, have I made the right decisions tactically in terms of my financial life, so that over the next, 15 years, when I finally decide that, gee, I no longer want to have to work anymore. Maybe I do want to work because I love it, or I want to do something that's going to allow me to, do something I'm passionate about. But how am I going to do that? And so I just really encourage people to take a good look at the trajectory you're on financially, really assess your situation. Everybody's different. Maybe take a look at your retirement savings and ask yourself where that's going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, if it continues performing the way that it is. Most people don't look at their retirement accounts until it's basically too late, because unfortunately in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, but in Australia, you know, we've got this superannuation system, which essentially is out of sight, out of mind for most people. They're not paying attention to it over the course of their working life. They know that there's money being paid by their employer over the course of years and decades, but they're just trusting that when they get to 60 or 65, that they're going to have enough, right? But the reality is, in this country, I was looking at some statistics the other day. The Australian Superannuation Fund Association puts out stats every year, and the latest statistics are that the average Australian who reaches 60 to 64 years of age, and in this country, the retirement age is 65, generally speaking, but the average person only has, for women it's 300,000 and for men it's 400,000. So 300,000 to 400,000 Australian dollars is what people have in their retirement accounts on the cusp of retirement. And the reality is, in this inflationary world we're in, it's just not enough.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they then go on to say that it's going to take the average individual about $55,000 a year just for basic necessities. And, you know, we need to then take into account they also have to pay rent. Are they still paying off a mortgage? All of these kinds of things. But you don't have to be Einstein to work out, if you've only got $300,000 or $400,000 sitting in your bank, in your retirement fund, and it's going to cost you, you know, $55,000, $60,000 a year, what are you going to do once that money runs out? And so this then leads us into a conversation about preparing now. If you've got a 10 to 15 year time horizon, and you can find a way to get yourself to 0.1 of a Bitcoin, 10 million Satoshis, which is going to cost you today around about that $10,000 US mark. And then we look at the historical CAGR, compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin, and we start plugging that figure in, you know, that 50%. If you want to be more conservative, go with 40%. If you want to be even more conservative, go with 30%. But just plot yourself a path with where you want to be in 15 years from now, because if you are in your mid-30s or your 40s, maybe you want to retire early. Maybe you don't want to wait till you're 60 or 65, you know, and so you can set yourself up for life with a 15-year time horizon without giving away the farm if you start allocating to Bitcoin as quickly as possible. You know, most people can beg, borrow, or steal $10,000 to get started in this asset. When I talk to most people, or most people that I consult with, you know, they have access generally to either underperforming superannuation fund that they want to roll over into a self-managed super fund so that they can then buy Bitcoin, because one of the issues in this country is that if you have an industry superannuation fund, you can't get any exposure to Bitcoin. And even if you can, you can't bring it into self-custody. Whereas if you roll over that industry superannuation fund into a self-managed superannuation fund that you control, you can then buy Bitcoin and you can bring it into self-custody. And so this is a big thing going on right now, where people are starting to realize, who are paying attention, superannuation funds, they're seemingly under attack. I can take control of my super, even if people want to still have their, you know, stock or share portfolios, buy some blue chip companies and that kind of a thing. They can still do that, but they can also get a meaningful allocation to Bitcoin and take that Bitcoin into self-custody through an SMSF. A lot of people don't realize it, but now they're starting very quickly to realize that. And this is why the self-managed super fund industry in this country, they are under siege right now. They're flat out. They're just people just moving really, really fast to try and get their money out of superannuation into these self-managed, because people don't trust. You know, they don't trust the system. They don't know what's going to be in 5 years, 10 years from now, but they can see where things are going. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, I would say, you know, if you have a superannuation fund, think very seriously about getting that into self-managed so that you can get an allocation to Bitcoin, because most people, if they're in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, generally speaking, they've got a good chunk in their super fund. Get that rolled over into an SMSF, get yourself some Bitcoin, get it into self-custody, which you can do. And then, and if not, then just get yourself to 0.1 as quickly as you can by doing whatever hustle you've got to do to just get that allocation. And I think, you know, I really think that once people get to that 0.1, if they do the steps, which is to buy the Bitcoin, custody the Bitcoin, get themselves to the next level in terms of the sovereignty aspect of it, I really think that people will then develop that confidence to then go, you know what, I'm going to allocate some more, and I'm going to allocate some more. So 0.1 is kind of the only becomes the start of it, and people start really going on a journey of stacking, you know, their way to an early retirement or a comfortable retirement, depending on their time horizon. So, you know, it's just comes back to people really having that light bulb moment that Bitcoin is a solution from the debt-based fiat system, but it's all about taking action while you still can.
Incredible. What are you studying right now? What books? What are some of your favorite Bitcoin books? What are you studying right now? You know, YouTube, you know, channels that you like, or how have you studied in the past? What are some of your top recommendations for the person just kind of the people you just spoke to, really, like what that are looking to say, okay, I know I need to do this. I need to take the plunge. What was your path that led you to where you are now studying?
Yeah, I mean, I the first book I read was The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean, and I've got it on my to-do list to read. I actually did it on Audible back in, I think, 2017, 2018. So I want to revisit that. I read Lynn Alden's book last year, Broken Money. It's a great book. And right now I'm in the middle of Larry Lepard's book, The Big Print. And I really think that The Big Print is an awesome book for most people to read, because, and I can see you nodding there, man, because you would agree, it's a pretty easy to digest
every man's book
synopsis.
Yep.
Yeah, it really is. Part one is all about the problem, and then part two is all about the solution. And so I'm really encouraging people right now to get their hands on Lawrence's book as quick as they can. Get it on Amazon, get it on Audible. So, you know, it's that. I'm constantly tuned into your show. I'm tuned into Robin's show. Anything where Jeff Booth is speaking, I'm always tuned in to what he's got to say. Tony Yazbek, I mean, he's probably my favorite guy in Bitcoin in terms of Bitcoin education, because he just constantly hammers home the point of what Bitcoin truly represents, and that is the sovereignty and the freedom technology. And you know, I kind of have a soft spot for Tony because he's got a personal vendetta against the system. You know, and when you understand his story, you understand why. Like we can laugh about that, but you know, we can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to be a successful businessman, retired, you know, living life comfortably, and then to wake up one day and to see a big fat round zero on your bank account and not being able to access your life savings and all of the carnage that followed. And I really encourage anybody to tune into some of Tony Yazbek's videos on YouTube. I know that Brandon, you did an awesome interview with him about a month ago, which I watched again just the last couple of days. And I'm constantly sending people to Tony so they can really learn about this vital aspect of Bitcoin that is not being shared enough. And so yeah, that's really it. Larry's book, I'd say, would be number one right now. Then move into the Bitcoin Standard, and then just, we all know that YouTube is such a phenomenal resource for learning. I like tuning into Bitcoin University. Just great stuff there. BTC sessions with Ben. He's just so great with teaching you how to self-custody, different wallets, devices, Lightning, running nodes. There's just so much awesome content out there. So I do move around a little bit, but when it comes to just authentic education about what truly Bitcoin represents and the mental side of Bitcoin and that conviction and that understanding of why we're here. Right now, I'm spending most time listening to Jeff Booth and Tony.
It's incredible stuff. And those are incredible people to listen to for anyone wondering where they can get more of that education. Like you said, we've had many of those people, I think all of them actually on this show. I know, Zane, you'll be on stage with many of these people over the coming years. I already know that, and speaking with them. So, where can people find you? What are you working on right now? Obviously, you have your YouTube channel. We'll link to that. Obviously, it's doing really well. What else are you working on, and where can people find you at?
Yeah. So, obviously, yeah, like you say, Brandon, my YouTube channel is I've got a little tiger by the tail there. I didn't anticipate that it would kind of take off the way that it has, but people seem to be really connecting with my content. So yeah, I'm just at Zane Truscott on YouTube. Also on X, you'll find me at Zane Truscott. I never really paid much attention to X, but in the last couple of months, I've really realized that I need to spend more time on it because that's where most of the Bitcoiners are, and I've already formed some great connections there. So you can find me on X. You can go to my website, zanetruscott.com, and I offer one-on-one coaching calls, consultations, whatever you want to call it, for people who are looking to level up, further their knowledge, build confidence, get into self-custody, just simple stuff. I also have a lady in Sydney who I recommend when it comes to people who are looking to roll over their superannuation into a self-managed so that they can set up a Bitcoin-friendly pension plan. So that's about where I'm at for now, mate. But watch this space. I'm spending a lot of time sort of considering what's next, and I'm really enjoying being a part of the Bitcoin community. I just love the fact that everyone I talk to is just, we're on the same page. We want to fix the money, fix the world. We're into personal development. We just want to see the world a better place for ourselves, for our communities, for our kids. And so I'm here to stay, brother.
Well, we are glad to have you. That is for damn sure, Zane. Mr. Zane Truscott, thank you so much for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters.
Appreciate you having me, Brandon. Thanks so much.
If you can't get enough of these interviews and you want to deepen your education on sound money, wealth building, and freedom, you're not going to want to miss this playlist here. Happy binging. Check it out now. We'll see you inside.